What did Lazarus say? Some years ago, standing at the side of my dad's casket, I felt real grief. And again a few years later at my mom's. Even knowing they were in heaven, I felt the heart-piercing arrows of death and separation. Those were deep emotional valleys for me. And when my mom died, after my dad, there was an unexpected emotional response to having lost both my parents. But imagine yourself back there with me. And then imagine the shock if one of them had sat up in their coffin. I can't even get my head around that thought. Could you? But I can tell you, I'd sure want to hear what they'd have to say. You see, in the Bible, something like that happened when a man named Lazarus died. It's found in John 11 in the New Testament. It's the story of Jesus raising his friend Lazarus from the dead. And if I had been there, I'd sure want to hear what Lazarus had to say. But any answer to, what did Lazarus say, is speculative because Lazarus had no lines. Skeptic, are you thinking, I don't believe this? If you are, just please watch and listen. Don't worry about believing it. Just enjoy the story. And seeker, think carefully how you would have reacted if you had been there. Many of those eyewitnesses believed. It was the event that pushed them over the edge into believing in Jesus. Maybe today's your day to believe. And believer, what if you had been Lazarus? What if you had been him? What would you have said to Jesus? Here's the story. Lazarus and his sisters Mary and Martha lived in Bethany on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives. It was about a 55-minute walk southeast of Jerusalem. Lazarus was gravely ill, just actually moments from death. So his sisters sent word to Jesus, who was a day's journey away, to come to heal their brother before he died. Jesus had healed a blind man, so they believed he could heal Lazarus. But shortly after their messenger headed out, Lazarus died. When Jesus got the message, he stated that this sickness wouldn't end in death. Not that Lazarus wouldn't die, you see, he already had, but at the end of the story, Lazarus would be alive again. And Jesus was just a day's walk away, but he didn't rush to get to Bethany. He stayed where he was for 2 more days. And Jesus used a common euphemism, sleep, for death. He was talking to his disciples, and he used the word sleep, which they thought meant literal, actual, just sleep. Jesus cleared that up, stating, Lazarus is dead. On the next day, Jesus and his disciples traveled to Bethany, humanly arriving 4 days late, but actually right on time. Many Jews were still graveside mourning Lazarus' death. When Martha saw Jesus, she said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus answered, Your brother will rise again. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even if he dies. Do you believe this? And Mary said the same thing to him. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus' response to her was different. He asked, Where have you laid him? When Jesus saw her and the other Jews weeping, not just teared up, but sobbing, that scene affected him. Verse 33 states that Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Those words are actually somewhat hard to translate from the Greek. They mean more than just being emotionally stirred up. They can actually mean that he was stern, angry, annoyed, displeased, and even deeply disappointed. And verse 35 states that Jesus wept. That's a different Greek word that means teared up or shed some tears, not sobbing. And some of the graveside Jews who were mourning said, He healed the blind. Couldn't he have kept this man from dying? Jesus stood at the cave tomb. Stone was covering the opening. And Jesus said, "Remove the stone." Remove the stone? Wait a minute, what? Imagine you're at a closed casket funeral, 4 days after your brother has died, with no embalming, and someone tells you, "Lift the lid." I can tell you, I understand Martha's response. Very human and natural. In the King James, it's stated this way, "Lord, by this time he stinketh. It's been 4 days." Some men, probably servants, rolled back the stone. Think about that. I wonder if they held their breath. When the stone was removed, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." Can you imagine that? There must have been a long, tense silence in the crowd. You see, Lazarus had been laid out dead on a cold stone slab for 4 days, and he was wrapped, wound in grave clothes. He had to get up, get his footing, and sort of must have been short step shuffle toward the light of the cave opening. And in that long silence, what was everybody thinking? I can imagine it. Someone might have been thinking, "Is this going to work?" Someone else, "Are you kidding? You are kidding, aren't you?" Someone else saying, "No way, not going to happen." Or did someone think, "I believe"? You see, then the proof of the miraculous happened. Lazarus shuffled out into the light. Can you imagine the shock? Imagine being there. And couldn't you see Mary and Martha bursting into tears of joy? And the bewildered crowd must have been shouting and cheering. But what about Lazarus? Remember, he's got no lines recorded in John 11. All we can do is speculate. So what do you think he said? What were his first words? I'll tell you, I can imagine him sort of stumbling up to Jesus and saying, "What were you thinking? I've been in paradise for 4 days. Wow, and is it ever fantastic? Bet you already know that, don't you? But you bring me back into the first century to live with my sisters again? To get sick and die again? I thought you were my friend. What were you thinking?" But you see, we don't know what Lazarus said. But we do know what others did and said. The mourners actually had two very different reactions. Some believed, but others ran off to tell the enemies of Jesus, who then planned to kill him. And a short time later, the chief priest planned to kill Lazarus too. Why? Because many people believed in Jesus because of the miracle. He brought Lazarus back from the dead. You see, you can be a first-hand eyewitness of a spectacular miracle and go in one of two different directions, by believing or by rejecting Jesus. You see, based on eyewitness testimony, some believed, but some rejected Jesus. It's the same today. So how do you react to their eyewitness testimony? Skeptic, have you pre-decided that you won't believe eyewitness testimony about Jesus? Or are you open? You should be. Are you open to the possibility that Jesus really is who he said he is? A few verses before the story of Lazarus, Jesus said these words, "If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do them, though you do not believe me, believe the works, so that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father." Jesus did the miraculous. Will you believe? And seeker, isn't it enough that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead? Isn't it time that you believe, that you settle this once and for all? Just click the 911 God link at the bottom of the justaquestion.org homepage. It takes you to a video where I'll explain how you can get right with God. And believer, think on this. We don't know what Lazarus said. But what would you say if you died and Jesus brought you back from heaven to your life just as it was 4 days ago. Would you be different? Would you be more confident and more vocal about your faith? What did Lazarus say? Well, more importantly for all of us, what do we say? I'm John Morris, and this has been Just a Question.